Whoo boy, you guys are in for a doozy with this one. Noise is a Belgian thriller that tells the story of Matthias, a social influencer who moves into his childhood home with his wife and infant son to have a fresh start for his family. Shortly after moving into the home, he learns about a workplace accident that occurred in a factory that his father used to own. The more he begins to investigate this accident, the more obsessed he becomes with solving it, which begins to affect his mental health and relationships with his family, especially once he starts developing a sensitivity to noise. Due to all of this, Matthias must solve the mystery behind the factory before he spirals out of control. This is what I'd like to convince you what the movie was about, because to be bluntly honest with you, I have no idea what the hell I watched. This was one of the most simultaneously boring and confusing movies I've seen in a long time, and that's due to one crucial problem that might come as a shocker. The story doesn't exist. Put in a different way, what story is there doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Everything from the characters, to the plot, to the threads connecting everything together never amounts to a cohesive whole. It's a mishmash of random ideas cobbled together into a spectacular mess that baffles one's senses the longer it goes on. The main character Matthias started off okay in the beginning, but he quickly grew into an insufferable idiot once the plot kicked off. Prior to everything else that transpires, he's not much more than a typical father who moves back home to be closer to family, so his ordinary nature already doesn't fare well in inspiring confidence. Once he starts looking into the mystery behind his father's factory, all bets are off. His transformation that happens over the course of the story is one of the most unbelievable kinds I've ever seen in all my years of watching movies, because there is absolutely no reason or context given as to why he spirals. Nothing intense or distressing is happening to him at all while he investigates the workplace accident. He'll just be reading random articles and going about his daily life, and then all of a sudden he'll start internally freaking out or lashing out at people who dare to speak a word to him, and it comes completely out of nowhere. This results in a lot of unintentional comedy popping up where it's supposed to be suspenseful. The funniest thing about him is the way he just stares at everything that's in his vision, like the scene where he stares at a fish head and the camera keeps cutting back and forth like it's supposed to be a terrifying moment. That scene had to be the hardest I've laughed in a movie in a long time. The longer the movie went on, the more I started to realize that Matthias had zero motivation to look into this workplace accident. The only hint that's given as to why he would do it in the first place is because he wants to deliver content to his social media followers. I don't think I have to go in depth to explain how terrible of a reason this is. It's one thing to want to look into something that his father was caught up in and give him justice, but to have Matthias do something just so he can give content to random people on Instagram doesn't exactly make me want to root for him. And the more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder, why is Matthias learning about all this just now? He goes around the whole movie acting surprised that his father even had a factory, which should be common knowledge in the movie's world. And for that matter, why is he so concerned about something that happened decades ago? No other character makes a fuss over it at any point. So for Matthias to not only hone in on it so much, but to the point where he descends into madness is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. Honestly, I'm starting to feel more like Matthias the longer I rant on about this movie. Literally nothing in it felt like it made sense when watching. Everything happens at pure random, so the lack of setup for just about everything that proceeds leaves little in the way of tension, and therefore no reason to care. The whole gimmick surrounding the noise that Matthias suffers from has to be one of the worst implemented concepts I've seen in a movie in recent years. I understand the idea behind it as far as to illustrate the deteriorating mental health of Matthias, but there's absolutely no build-up or reason given as to why it happens. Again, it's meant to be suspenseful in how it plays out, but it completely fails in this regard, instead being annoying like with how many times the audience has to put up with his infant son crying, or hilarious, like when he sits outside with his father and he stares deadpan at him while he eats a piece of fruit. Seriously, this is one of the funniest bad movies that I've seen in a long time. There is so much about it that's executed so haphazardly and with such little thought behind it as to whether or not it makes sense that it's actually fascinating to see. Unfortunately, one has to sift through a lot of crap in order to get to that kind of stuff. The majority of the movie is agonizingly slow in pacing, and even when the mystery is underway, nothing ever feels like it has any sort of narrative urgency behind it. For a movie that's only 90 minutes long, it sure doesn't feel like it. The other characters in the movie don't do anything to help what's wrong with it. Matthias' wife Liv adds nothing to the plot besides random arguments with her husband, and everyone else who's there just exists to do whatever the plot tells them to do. The relationship between husband and wife in this movie is really odd because of the tonal shifts that happen between them. One moment they'll be peaceful and loving with each other, and then the next they'll be going at it, and later on they'll go back to where they were before like nothing happened. The story also suffers from these same kinds of tonal shifts, usually due to jarring jump cuts, which also makes the story hard to follow along with. These become especially distracting when they're followed up by any of the ridiculous noises Matthias puts up with, which only makes the movie more annoying to watch. And it's already hard enough to watch and follow along with in trying to make sense of the overarching mystery. Even if one takes Matthias out of the equation, the whole plot is essentially a gigantic nothing burger that takes too long, lacks tension, and has no reason to exist. The movie tries to make it out like the whole town is in on the mystery that Matthias finds himself in, but it never goes anywhere. Liv goes around town advertising her catering business to no avail, which is a complete waste of screen time, and the way citizens act hostile toward her is weird, as it comes and goes without any build-up or conclusion. It tries to shake things up by throwing in the occasional jump scare and other horror elements, but they're more annoying than scary. The complete absence of tension right from the get-go leaves any attempt to generate suspense fall flat on its face. The only parts of the movie that remotely succeed in keeping the viewer invested are the more technical aspects that are separated from the story. The ambient soundtrack is appropriately dark and moody, and the close-ups featured with the cinematography does draw some intrigue, but it's just not enough to overcome the aimlessness of everything else surrounding these things. Everything about this movie is a total mess that the audience can never make sense of. Subplots are introduced and abandoned at random, the setup to the story is random, characters change mood at random, the entire movie is random, and combined with its slow pacing, it simply doesn't have a reason to exist. Even if there was some semblance of structure behind it, the movie is far from being original. When one gets down to it, it's just another horror flick where bad things happen after a couple moves into a new home, and the new homeowners fall victim to a curse. And the filmmakers couldn't even get that right, because the curse has zero setup or context, which leaves the premise dead on arrival. And as one could expect, the movie ends just as flatly as it begins. Matthias and his family all become embroiled in a series of events that fail to resolve anything, leave more questions than answers if there were any, and characters never reach any sort of appropriate conclusion to their arc. To put it simply, it's just a waste of time. Overall, Noise is a terrible thriller that completely and epically fails at generating suspense or mystery, and even at being a coherent movie in general. If you like thrillers that proceed with a slow burn pacing and delve into a character's psyche, please do anything else other than watch this movie. It's not worth anyone's time. This is one of those kinds of movies that make you wonder if the director watched the final cut from beginning to end. I would go on to repeat all the things that are wrong with it, but the lack of a basic understanding of mise-en-scène is all that needs to be said. The title alone tells everything one needs to know, as it all amounts to a pile of noise that no one should force themselves to experience. What did you think about this movie? Did you hate it as much as I did, or did you find some redeeming factors to it? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Noise. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the American animation, The Magician's Elephant. Bye bye!